My name is Joan Wages. I'm President and CEO of the National Women's History Museum. Thank you so much for coming, and we welcome you to this wonderful series of programs that we are partnering with George Washington University, the History Department, and we are so pleased to be presenting this program this evening, Game Changers, Women in Sports. For those of you who know about the National Women's History Museum, we are working on this project we're lobbying Congress for a building site that is on or next to the National Mall. And for those of you who are looking for something to do, on March 4th, we are going to have a lobby day, and we are going to bring people together and have them go visit their members of Congress and tell them why it is so important that we have a National Women's History Museum. And after you leave this evening, you'll have just a taste of that there is so much about women's history that we don't know, and there's so much that is interesting and fascinating, and so you'll be able to walk away from this evening and be able to tell people about why this museum is so important. As all of us are watching the Olympic Games on television, I'd just like to tell you a few interesting tidbits that demonstrates how far women have come. Women first took part in the Olympic Games in Paris in 1900, where female athletes accounted for 2.2% of the participants. And by 2012, in London, women accounted for 44% of the athletes. In 1900, only 2 of the 95 total events were women only, and those were golf and tennis. And then if we flash forward 114 years, and of the 98 events being held in Sochi, 49 or 50% are for women only. We're celebrating a number of other firsts in Sochi, including this is the first Winter Olympics in which women are able to participate in the ski jump competition. That's only 90 years after the men's ski jumping made its debut. And the U.S. hockey team is being coached by a woman, Casey Stone. Casey is not only the first woman to lead the U.S. team, she is the only female head hockey coach in Sochi. So we're continuing to break down barriers all the time. And as many of you know, Title IX can be recognized for the important impact that it has made in women's lives. And it has inspired women to pursue equal opportunities in all of their endeavors. Furthermore, like for men, the ability to participate in organized sports has made a difference in the lives of women and girls, particularly for those who successfully applied the lessons they learned in sports to other areas of their lives. We are delighted to have 3 highly accomplished women with us this evening to discuss this fascinating topic. But let me just take a detour to say, for those of you who are tweeting, our handle this evening is @Women'sHistory, and our hashtag is Women and Sports. So our 3 panelists this evening are Jill Agostino, our moderator, a current editor at the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. Ms. Agostino has had a distinguished career as a sports editor for both regional and national newspapers, and is the past president of the Association for Women in Sports Media. Dr. Bonnie Morris is a faculty member at both Georgetown and the George Washington Universities. Dr. Morris is a scholar who teaches women's studies, including a course on gender and athletics. And Mariah Burton Nelson, a former professional athlete, Ms. Burton Nelson became a groundbreaking author and expert speaker. She is a national authority on sports, success, and leadership. We welcome you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great, thanks. So I'm first just going to ask each of them to fill out a little bit, and I think that will help you understand more when they're talking, really, their perspectives and where they're coming from. So, Mariah.
Okay, well, thanks, Joan, for that wonderful introduction and background about the National Museum of Women's History. I'm here because I'm a fan of the museum, though it doesn't quite exist yet, but there's a group of women who believe in it and are making it happen, women and men both, and I'm part of that team. Yeah, Bonnie teaches history, and I am history. I am an athlete. I did play basketball at Stanford and in the first women's pro league in this country, which I now think of as the LNEH, which is the league nobody's ever heard of. But we were pioneers, paving the way for the WNBA that exists today. I also played professionally overseas in France and had one rebounding record at Stanford that was unbroken for 24 years. And I'm still an athlete, thank you. I'm still an athlete. I still play golf and swim and do yoga and ping pong and all sorts of things. All the sitting and floating sports is how I think of it, because I've got injured knees. But I managed to combine my love of sports with my love of writing, and for 19 years wrote about women athletes and gender-related issues in sports. My most popular book was called The Stronger Women Get, The More Men Love Football. And then after 19 years of speaking and writing, I got tired of being on the road a lot, and now I work for ASAE, the American Society of Association Executives, as the Vice President of Innovation.
Hi, and I'm in my 20th year of teaching women's studies on the faculty of GW. I developed the class Gender and Athletics in '96, and I've taught it every semester since then, both here and at Georgetown. So I've taught women's sports history to student athletes from every sport, from football to basketball to crew to lacrosse, and I'm leaving out a whole lot. I myself am a lousy athlete, but I'm a really good writer. I come from a volleyball family. My father built the volleyball courts at the Lincoln Memorial to create a free recreation space for the citizens of DC, which is his great legacy. I, in contrast, had my head in a book, and now I've written 10 of them. Most recently, my book, Women's History for Beginners, became the book of the month on C-SPAN, Book TV. And one of the things that I do in teaching women's sports history is try to add to the women's studies curriculum, not just here, but globally, some good material on how we understand how far women have come in terms of their competitive bodies, and it's been a joy.
Great. Okay, so why don't we start out, Bonnie, why don't you just give us a quick overview on Title IX?
Of Title IX?
Title IX.
Okay. Well, Title...
You ever heard of that?
Yes, certainly. I was expecting the other question first. No. Title IX is Title IX of the Education Act of 1972, signed into law by President Richard Nixon. And it was actually not intended to be a sports law. It was intended to ban sex discrimination at any institution that receives federal funding. And it really resulted from a lot of pressure from students, female, who were very frustrated at not being able to major in archaeology or get into the college of their choice or attend a magnet school like Bronx Science. It was boys only. So there were a lot of education programs that took federal money but banned girls, and many universities that took federal funding for defense contracts or whatever that didn't admit women at all. So initially it was assumed to be a means of getting women into law school, med school, grad school, Yale, and then suddenly it was pointed out that this would certainly impact sports programs, where by 70s standards, 99% of the money went to boys' sports and leaving 1% for women's. And immediately there was an outcry with a proposal to exempt football. And that was suggested by John Tower of Texas, the Tower Amendment, and that's resulted in a lot of humor about there being three sexes, men, women, and football. So it became really clear that what a lot of universities wanted to protect was the money that went into what they call revenue-producing sports. This is just the beginning of justifications to limit change for women. But as the 70s progress, in fact, women accelerate rapidly once they're permitted to have funding, facilities, and access. And most of the 70s are spent debating what, in fact, Title IX will mean. Ultimately, it means that you have to have everything from NCAA participation to fair media coverage to fair playing time and women taking the plane and not just the bus when they go on the road. It's resulted in some interesting changes, which have not only included women outnumbering men and bringing home the gold at the Olympics, but more men realizing there's profit and honor in coaching women. That's had the effect of edging women out of coaching roles, which is a setback in a lot of ways from the days when men's and women's gyms were separate, but women controlled their own sphere. So there's a lot to discuss. Any of my students in the audience, hi, this is your final exam right here. But overall, what Title IX did was it gave women legal legs to contest some really outrageous acts of discrimination that don't really save money for men's sports to begin with. My favorite example at a school I won't name, where I taught before coming here, big snow like we've had, they'd go out and plow the men's field, but not the women's. The women went to a lacrosse doubleheader and were given shovels and then play a doubleheader. That kind of egregious pettiness. Or promoting a homecoming weekend, everybody come to the men's game and leaving out the women's events that are going on while the parents are there. And what we know is that women are 55% or more of college students. So there's going to be some women's games when the parents are here too. The fact is that Title IX gives you a means of reminding a school that you are obligated to provide for both male and female students, and everyone's paying that tuition. They cannot be shredded. Okay, it's a short answer.
42 years later, we still do not have parity
anywhere.
Anywhere. Well, in some colleges we do.
Yeah.
Stanford, for instance.
Yeah.
We do, actually. But it's something like last I saw was $169 million more dollars go to men's scholarships than women's. And the percentage of female athletes on college campuses is somewhere in the 42 range.
Yeah.
Even though they're 55% of the students. So, as you were saying, Bonnie, the legal, we have the legal authority, but usually schools have had to be sued before they will comply with Title IX. It's not like 72 happened, the law passed, and all of a sudden everybody said, oh, sure, let's be fair.
And I can add, and here's the show and tell, that in the mid-70s, 5-7 years after Title IX, I was working out in this. There's my gym suit. This was not what the guys were wearing, nor did it make you really want to get out there and compete. In fact, I was in '76 at Walt Whitman High over there in Enlightened, Montgomery County. While the guys were playing actual games, we women were marching up and down to a record album with a guy singing "Go You Chicken Fat Go." Not only not learning leadership and team skills, but being humiliated and uglified. So the pace of change also contains a lot of provisions like religious exemptions for schools and so forth. GW has done very well with Title IX, in part because GW is in compliance with a prong that is called Showing a History of Expanding Opportunities. And GW, of course, acquired Mount Vernon, which permitted all kinds of teams for women to be added because land was added. So a good question is what happens if you're a landlocked university, or how do you expand if you're an urban school and you don't have money or options? There's probably a lot of schools that would like to offer more opportunities to girls that feel very stuck. And here I'm talking about middle schools and high schools, because we can look at college, but it's really where you see discrimination still burgeoning in schools with younger people, that you eliminate the possibility of advancing to elite competition. So yeah, there's a lot to do.
Why don't we, and Mariah, why don't you get into your story? Because you were right when, Title IX was enacted, basically. Yes. And then you started, and I mean, you did amazing. things.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was all of us around the country were starting to pressure the athletic directors to enforce Title IX. I arrived at Stanford in 1974, and speaking of show and tell, here's my penny. This is what we were given for uniforms. Anybody recognize this?
Yeah.
The way you wear it, no, men wouldn't recognize it particularly because they didn't have to wear it so much, but the way you wear it is like this, like an apron with ties in the back, and it's very symbolic, I think, of those days when women were supposed to stay in the kitchen and not be out there on the basketball court. So we wore, luckily it was not the whole uniform. We did have white t-shirts and red shorts. But the men, of course, at Stanford in 1974 had full uniforms. They had paid coaches. They got to play in Maples Pavilion, which is where the women and men still play, in 2014. And we had this little tiny women's gym that was about the size of this room. And we were smart Stanford students, so we knew about the law that had passed in 1972, and we spent all of our free time in the athletic director's office reminding him about the law and holding sit-ins because we had older siblings who had lived through the 60s. So we'd heard about sit-ins. So we had sit-ins in the athletic director's office saying, look, you have to start enforcing Title IX. We want to play in Maples Pavilion. We want real uniforms. We want paid coaches. And we want to travel all over the country like the men do, playing basketball. We were very persistent. We were very annoying, I'm sure. They were angry with us, but we were right. And over the course of those 4 years, we did get into Maples Pavilion. We got real uniforms. We got two of the best coaches in the country, not Tara Vanderveer, who's currently there, but her predecessor, Dottie McRae, and Sue Roysowitz, who had played on the 1976 Olympic team, the first time women's basketball was in the Olympics. So they did begin to enforce Title IX when I was there, and finally the year after I graduated, there were 12 full scholarships for women. So I like to think I helped open doors and pave the way for women to have more opportunities, but at the same time, I wasn't alone. I was with my team and with other women athletes at Stanford, and all over the country the same thing was happening. We didn't know that, but other women and men who supported us were pressuring people to start implementing Title IX, and that's really how it happened and how it continues to happen.
Great. And so let's talk a little bit about what sports do for women. So Mariah, why don't you start with that?
Well, let me ask you first. How many of you think of yourselves as athletes? Okay. And how many did not raise your hand but swim or do weightlifting or walk or run for exercise? A bunch more. Yeah. Okay, I encourage you to use the word athlete. Think of yourself as an athlete. I guarantee you it will change the way you walk, the way you work, and the decisions you make about leadership, teamwork, and success. For women to be athletic is not just about fun and games at this point in history. Maybe in the future it will be, but at this point in history, it's a very empowering thing to do because there is still pressure to stay in the kitchen, so to speak. There was an article we were just discussing in the Post this weekend where a woman was equating cooking with being feminine and weightlifting and sports and assertiveness and self-confidence with being masculine. That's crazy. Those are human qualities and behaviors, but these attitudes do persist despite lots of progress we have made. So to be an athlete is to set goals for yourself, right? To decide for yourself how and when and why you want to move. It's to be competitive, to dare to compete. A lot of women still struggle with competition in the workplace. They don't want somebody else to lose while they are on their way to success. They worry more about how somebody else will feel than about their own achievements. And as an athlete, you learn that actually your achievements inspire other people. It's good for you to achieve. They will see and learn from you. So competition isn't really a battle. It's not about defeating and stomping on somebody else. It's even a form of intimacy. It's a way to connect with other people and be inspired by them and learn from them as you both proceed toward your goals. So sports are tremendously empowering, and I'll just also note that for me, I think they're also about love. I've written a lot, 6 books, not as many as you, Bonnie, speaking of competition. Though I've written hundreds of articles. But one theme I noticed in my work is that as I was listening to other female athletes and telling my own athletic story, really what we're talking about often is love. We're loving our bodies. We're not hating them because they don't conform with some sort of beautiful ideal. We're not hating them because they're not thin enough. we are loving what they can do and how they can make us feel and what they can achieve. And then we are loving our teammates as we work together on teams, sometimes co-ed teams, sometimes with all women or other girls. And we're even sometimes realizing that we can love these competitors who are inspiring us to do our best and pushing us to achieve more than we could otherwise.
I would add confidence and access to paths of leadership and so forth. And I think it's very telling that a caricature of 70s feminism is women who were karate chopping men. Actually, that's a twisting of what really happened, which is women were taking self-defense classes because they were afraid to go out at night, and they were aware that they were afraid to walk to their car. What if somebody bothered them? They didn't know how to respond quickly or have the reflexes or any of the things that you might learn as an athlete that help you in a situation where, at the very least, you have to run fast. So that's a reminder how few women had access to sports, that they had to really start with how you even guard your own body or learn how to walk comfortably. There's a lot of politics about footwear, but anyway.
Yes.
And I would also say that what I see from the students I've engaged with, what's really fantastic today is all of the women as well as the men have access to what I would call sport literacy. They can rattle off their favorite team, statistics, who went to this bowl, you know, who's the champion, who's the underdog, who's in trouble. Some of this is the media age, but you would not have heard girls talking like that, you know, when I was 12 or 13. And you wouldn't have seen the same level of literacy about health and wellness, people talking about their lipids and their ACL and the lactic acid burn and restoring their electrolytes. That's terrific, but it makes the whole human race move forward when women are not buying into the idea that it's cute to be weak.
Yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and how many of you out there, especially the students, really didn't know what Title IX was, maybe when you were competing in high school or until you got to college or anything? Or there's some, I think it's really amazing now when I meet with and hang out with younger women that they seem to have a sense of confidence that I never had at that age. And you know, I was right on the cusp. I was a little bit behind Mariah, where I wasn't allowed to play Little League baseball, although my sister, who was 2 years younger, could. We weren't allowed to play soccer in high school. And I just picked up my nephew last year. He's 8, and I was picking him up from a wrestling practice or something, and I said, "What's your favorite sport?" Because, you know, you're trying to make conversation with an 8-year-old. And he said, "Soccer." And he said, "Did you play?" And I said, "Oh, no, I wasn't allowed to play soccer." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I was a girl." He said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, because he has girls on his team, and he doesn't think of it any differently. And his little sister can beat the crap out of him on some stuff." And I love watching, like, they just play sports and they just do things. And what I've seen in young women is just such a presence that a lot of women in my generation really don't have. And it's, oh, and by the way, I haven't written any books. And,
You've accomplished
you know,
a lot, though.
but I could maybe edit one of their books, but I haven't written it.
New York Times over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, like I can write, but I can't dribble, and Mariah can write and dribble. So, you know what I'm saying?
She can do it at the same time, actually, which is really impressive.
I'd like to point out that as the generation that was brought into soccer, but one of 4 girls at my soccer camp, I was there because I knew I had a right to be there. You know, I was a bad athlete, but a good feminist. I knew I had a right to play. I had a right to play badly. And I've used that expression several times in interviews because I think it's important. You weren't going to become an elite athlete immediately. There was so much catching up to do. You don't simply, you know, get up and, as people have said, run the marathon when you've been forced to sit down for hundreds of years. And for a lot of women, the expectation that you would immediately be judged against the statistics or achievements of the world's most accomplished male athletes, that's very defeating if you go in with that expectation. My brother had been nurtured as an athlete from the time he was little, and I was very much behind him, although I was the elder. But I went to soccer camp with him to prove that a girl could take it. criticize me, knock me down. I'm not going to cry. Teach me. I want to learn. I'm going to get out there and suck, but I want to get better. And how else if I don't try? So I kind of asserted my right to be there, and I was well received, and it was a very supportive environment, that particular camp. But at the time, I didn't understand. I was being coached by Anson Dorrance, who went on to take the Women's World Cup to the championship. So we had guys who believed in the rights of girls to play. And that experience was fantastic, you know, even though I'm still the world's worst right halfback in the United States. But the thing is that I had the right to attempt to improve. And what we see with Title IX is if you create the conditions to bring everyone up a level, man, that's good for the whole country. It's good for the whole world.
Well, and I think we were talking about that. There was an opinion piece in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago by David Epstein, which was talking about with the Olympics coming up and women could ski jump. But what it was comparing women athletes and men. And I remember sending the link to both of them and getting anguished emails back. But you know, that the point is that it's not that I want to be able to run as fast as a man, but I want the opportunity to be able to run. And that's what I think Title IX is all about, is just providing those opportunities.
Yeah, it always comes up around the Olympics. And I did write an article, letter to the editor, which didn't get published, although another one will be, I think, on Sunday. But it always comes up that are the fastest women as fast as the fastest men? And women are not really fixated on that. But the articles keep coming up as a way to say, look, you are inferior. You have accomplished everything you've accomplished. We don't care. We are still stronger and bigger and better than you are. It's a really ineffective way to argue that men are superior.
But, you know,
but it keeps coming up.
People who take my class are familiar with, you know, the lesson where we look at how women of today easily beat records set by men X number of decades ago, because we all have access to better shoes, better vitamins, better food, better training facilities. The humans have evolved, and a lot of it is through technology, medicine, you know, the invention of insulin, contact lenses, etc. When I think of my grandfather having his appendix out without anesthesia, you know, back in Bedford-Stuyvesant, you know, however many decades ago, the fact that we have made it possible for children to live longer and be in school and be healthier, inevitably we've made it possible for human improvement to be a matter of record. And it's simply not putting women into the pipeline to benefit from those discoveries that keeps women back.
I wanted to reinforce something you said a moment ago, too, about getting better over time. I love that you had a right to suck, as you put it.
Sorry, I swore at GW, forgive me.
But also I hear from women, so I thought this might be relevant to some of you in the audience, who say, well, I'm just not coordinated. Maybe a woman, you know, 40 plus will say that to me. And I'll say, well, how much time have you spent training your body?
Right.
And you do improve. Okay, so you did not become an elite athlete, but you did get better. You're very modest, and it makes a funny story, but the more you do anything, the better you get at it. I just started playing piano, and I'm getting a lot better, and I'll never be a concert pianist, and I don't care. But I know that about practice, and people who haven't been taught to practice with their bodies and notice continuous improvement with their bodies can get a mindset of, oh, I'm just a klutz. And I hear it all the time. It kind of hurts me to hear it. And I say, well, practice. You'll get better. Find a coach.
What we need to do is bring women of all ages into the kind of daily conversation about sport and sports culture that we assume is the province of men or the right of men. And I think it's very humorous to talk about how few of us can picture a grandmother, granddaughter having a catch in the backyard, where we can imagine a grandfather and grandson doing that, or a grandmother taking her granddaughter to a football game or what have you. But also, you know, a little boy gets on a bus with his dad, and then a stranger says to the little boy, how you doing, Tiger? Who do you figure for the Super Bowl? And they start a conversation. We don't imagine an elderly woman getting on a bus, seeing a little girl and going, yo, pumpkin, who do you figure for the championship? That just sounds bizarre. And in so many ways, we cut girls out of the conversation really early, and then we joke about them not being able to follow the game, you know, when they're older. Or if you are on the other side of, you know, 40 as I am, when I go down and work out on the ice rink on the National Mall, you know, there's little boys skating fast, and then there's a few women doing graceful moves in the middle, and then there's me skating around fast. And everyone looks at, what is this older woman doing, acting like a boy? I'm feeling joy in my body, thank you very much, get out of my way. But that's a very new attitude, and sometimes not well received. And I'd like to see other women out there speeding around.
But I think there is, you know, that does raise something. I think you see more and more, I see it when I go to nationals games, of mothers and fathers taking their daughters to the games. And, you know, certainly, and we did a front page story on this in the Times several years ago when the WNBA was starting. And I was noticing when I was going to work that there would be just tons of little girls on the train, getting on the train platforms, taking the trains into Penn Station to go watch the Liberty play. And I had just never seen anything like that before. And that was a very cool thing. And I think more and more, you know, they are, like you said, being part of the conversation from a much younger age. Yeah. But one thing I wanted to ask, and I know you have a great story with this, is does it make a difference if your mother played a sport?
Well, it certainly can, of course. Role models really matter. We look wherever we can find them. I didn't have role models on television because there was no women's sports on television. I looked to Babe Dedrickson because I read one book about Babe Dedrickson, and she was a multi-sport athlete, amazing, brash, outspoken, competitive woman. But she died the year I was born, so I didn't have any contact with her either. But then right there in my own house, I had my mother, who was extremely competitive, but she only had one sport, and that was swimming. And she had trouble finding somebody to compete against her in swimming because she had no organized opportunities. So I realized recently this is why she had children, was to create some competitors. So she had my older sister, Carol, but Carol was not an athlete and had no interest in sports, and so mom had to keep having kids, and so she had my brother, Peter, and he was very athletic, loved baseball and soccer, but then he had ear problems that kept him out of the pool. So that's why I got to be born. And then after me, my mom could stop having kids because I was perfectly willing to race against mom in the pool. And so our first race took place when I was 5 years old. She was 37. And she had waited for this for 37 years, so she was very excited. And I was happy too, because she was happy. I was playing with my mom, and my dad was on the side of the neighbor's pool with a stopwatch and said, ready, set, go. And we swam to the end as fast as we could. And when I got there, I could tell she'd already been there for a while, but just to be sure that I knew it, she slapped the end and said, ha, beat you. And, you know, some little girls would have been jarred by this and maybe quit right then. But I looked at my mom. She was happy. Her hair was all slicked back. Her eyes were all full of chlorine. And she was smiling. And I had just swum probably the fastest lap of my life. We were playing together. It was very clear to me that competition was fun and female. At the same time, I was not a stupid child. She looked a little happier than I felt. So I thought maybe winning would be fun too. And my mother was a physician, which was another amazing role model for me. After about 14 years of general practice, she went back to school for 3 years in her late 40s and became a psychiatrist. But so she showed me professionally too that women can do whatever they want. But while she was busy working, I joined a swimming team and I trained and I got better. I improved because I practiced. And each year I would challenge her to that same backyard race over at my neighbor's house. And the year I was 6, she won again. And she won when I was 7, but I was getting closer. And I raced again when I was 8 and 9 and 10. And finally, the year I was 10, I beat my mom. And of course I said, ha, beat you, Mom. But she disputes this, maintaining I was 11 by the time I finally won. But it was such a close relationship, and is still a close relationship. I'm happy to say my mom is still with us, and over the years we continued to compete, but I did get faster than she ever did because I was training and she was not, and I was young, and eventually she was not. And I said, you know, Mom, I've heard about this thing called masters swimming, where you could compete against people your own age, you know, not just me. You could actually compete against people your own age. And she said, oh, I'm not very fast, you know, she's very modest and didn't have a lot of confidence as an athlete because she had never really trained. And I said, you really ought to try it. I think you are fast. And then she came to visit me. She lives in Arizona. She came to visit me here in Virginia. And I took her to my master's swimming program. and put her over there in that far lane with Lorraine and Helen, who were about her age, in their late 60s, 70s at that point. And she noticed that she could keep up with them. So that was the year she was 69. She waited until she was 70, so she'd be in the bottom of her age group, not competing against those fast 65-year-olds. And she started competing in Masters meets, and sure enough, she set 3 Arizona state records. Yeah. And we even went to nationals together. She placed in 6 different events. She placed in the top 10 in the nationals. And her coach told her if she had had proper training, she could have probably been an Olympian. I mean, she really was an amazing athlete. And now at 89, she's not competing anymore, but she does get on her little walker and takes about an hour to get to the pool, and then gets in the pool and swims for a good half hour. So she remains an amazing role model for me. Yeah, I will just add, I took a video of her that's on YouTube. If you search my name, Mariah Burton Nelson, you could find it. It's like a 7-minute clip of mom swimming now, and how much energy it takes just to get changed because of her physical ailments of arthritis and a heart problem and various things that keep her moving very slowly. But she's so determined to go swim, and then she gets in the pool and she relaxes and she's happy, and still, counting laps and trying to do more today than she did yesterday. So I'll just, to again connect that to the audience, there are women and girls who are looking to you to figure out how to be strong and brave as athletes and as professionals. And you may not even realize that they're looking to you, but they are. They're watching how you move your body and how you respect your body and how you take care of it and how willing you are to compete. And I'm sure you're all good role models for them.
Well, it's interesting because I did sports. My older brother was 4 years older than I was, and I was determined to keep up with him from the time I was about 3 and could run. And, it's easy for me to go to the gym and to work out because I'm in shape and I like it. And people will say to me, "Oh, I so admire that you go." And I'm like, no, for me, it's easy. It's the women who are there who you can tell it's their first time or second time and they're not feeling very comfortable. And those are the women who should be admired for going to the gym, right? Because they realize they need to be there and it's so good for them to be there. And I encourage, all of you, don't be afraid to try something new. I just took up boxing, so I'm boxing every morning. And
so watch out.
Yeah, I know,
like
seriously.
I love to tell this story. I rollerblade. I bought rollerblades on my 30th birthday, so I would not stop playing. And I rollerblade around my Embassy neighborhood, but only where there are parked cars I can, grab onto. And I tell the story of how I'm rollerblading around, and a long Embassy car pulls up, and the protective glass comes down, and an elegant woman's hand in a glove reaches out, and some diplomatic woman says, "You are so brave." Really, I'm not, I'm just grabbing onto parked cars. But that thing of not being afraid.
Not being afraid to try something new, I think, just to have a new challenge for your body and to do something different, whether it's, I'm going to walk a mile, make it fun, make it that you're going to walk and meet someone at the coffee shop instead of taking the metro or taking your car and start that way and just, get out, and you will just feel so much better, I think, with your body and everything. So let's turn now to something everybody or a lot of people are watching, which are the Olympics, right? Which, and as she was saying at the beginning, how much it's increased in the women's participation in the Olympics. And I will say, I did a thesis when I was in graduate school on how print media portrayed women athletes in the 50s. And if you want to see how far we've come, it's stunning. What's available to women now and what women can do. So let's talk a little bit about the Olympics and what role that's played in helping women athletes.
Alana Myers, GW. I'm going to run home tonight and watch a student I graded bobsled for gold, and there is no greater thrill. I'm so happy. From softball to bobsled, anything is possible. The thing about the coverage of women in the Olympics and the women's participation, we can see that a lot of things have been added from the 80s on. Women's soccer, women's softball, weightlifting, pole vaulting. Everyone forgets about that. But, the U.S. women weren't allowed to do ice hockey at the Olympics until Nagano in '98, and the first year they were allowed, they won gold. It's an astounding story. Now we take it for granted that that should be something women are permitted to do. The interesting thing to watch is where stories about women's athletic success have to be connected to a relationship, you know, their fiance or their brother or something. That's the one thing that we do to kind of soften female achievement. We return the storyline to something emotional. And what I noticed in the Summer Games recently were the women who were high achieving, who were reported with headlines like "Mom wins gold," or, you know, "Despite pregnancy, so-and-so wins gold." These are not only reminders that women are supposed to be reproducing in the age range when they're, you know, at peak performance, but it also makes the female body look vulnerable. A reminder that, well, this is a body meant for pregnancy or motherhood. What are you doing? So when you look at articles, you want to beware for those kinds of tricks and look for the achievement and not so much the association with a guy, boyfriend, brother, coach, that's the Trinity, or the possibility of drama because the female body is so vulnerable. Well, so's the men's, but it doesn't end up in the headlines in the same way.
This is the one time we get to see women on television. I mean, even with the zillion channels we have now, in non-Olympic years, the percentage of sports coverage that is devoted to women's sports is between 2 and 3%. You know, so when the Olympics are not on, not that much else is on, except men's sports. So even though we've made tremendous progress in terms of participation numbers and at the Olympics themselves, the ordinary sports coverage in the Times, I'm sorry to say, and in the Post, and in almost every newspaper around the country, and maybe this is why newspapers are doing so badly, is they're ignoring this huge story. But so that's part of why we get so excited about the Olympics. Finally, we get to see women on TV. And yeah, I think I did see something about skating, you know, doing the little dream thing. That's my pet peeve, is the female skaters always were little girls dreaming of success. And the male skaters were somehow never little boys dreaming of success. You don't get to be successful through dreaming. You get to be successful through hard work. And that sort of mythical story of the little princess who just got, you know, kissed by somebody and suddenly she's a star is a little annoying, but I think we do much better with bobsledding and skeleton, where they're going down head first and stuff now. And those, what do they call it?
Snowboarding?
Snowboarding,
yeah.
Snowboarding. The X Games, yeah.
Although it is interesting to me how we return to femininity in performance sports, and that oftentimes what is a high ticket seller at both the Winter and Summer Games, you'll have ice skating and you'll have gymnastics, both of which for a long time relied on, you know, really young girls, and the scoring in the minds of a lot of people was sort of vague. It had to do with artistic prettiness and etc. And it permitted women to be high achieving or gold medalists without compromising the femininity that the media had in mind. And this was in fact helped along by some of the changes after Nadia Comaneci scores a perfect 10. Then we want to get our gymnasts to score perfect 10s, and we go to younger and smaller prepubescent bodies. So for adult women to show their strength and fierceness is in contrast to the smaller young girl body that's sometimes favored in events that do see high ticket sales. Rough sports, which are hardly alien to, you know, Canadian women, have to be reintroduced every 4 years as we cheer on women's ice hockey or bobsled or what have you. And some of that also has to do with the fact that the Winter Games are not as representative of international diversity as the Summer Games. They originated in Scandinavia. It's very important that we have all of these, you know, women of color in bobsled, where that was all white Winter Games until quite recently. And those are real achievements. We've seen some of that in ice skating as well. But we've also seen where women who were really strong skaters, like Surya Bonali, are portrayed in the media as too aggressive or too tough. So it's really hard for women to move away from the nice girl image and be ferocious.
One thing I'd like to see in skating is pairs that are same sex.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? There are a lot of strong women.
Yeah.
And there are small men and big men, and they do it in the gay games. And it's not about a gay relationship, it's just about, it's a different story you're telling when you have two men skating together in dancing or pairs, or two women skating together. So there's nothing inherent about skating that has to tell a heterosexual seeming story.
Yeah, David and Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi, and then the music from, oh, I don't know, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Biblical epic skating.
Right.
All right.
How many of you are watching the Olympics? Are all of you? I think the thing that has struck me has been with sort of the X Games factor that's coming in now, is that the women, many, competing on the same courses as men, whereas in the downhill, the giant slalom, the slalom, they'll have different courses for the men and the women, and they are literally competing on the same, in the same half pipe, they're competing on the same, the slope style and all of that, and, it's not, they're not comparing the men and the women. Women are still competing against women, men are competing against men, but it's, it's basically, there's no boundaries as there have been in the past, and I think that's showing just a real strength in women that we haven't seen before. We haven't been allowed to see, really.
Yeah, and they're saying baggy uniforms.
Oh yeah,
and I think are horrible, but
right.
At least they don't have the women in little skirts or something,
Yeah, no, that's beach volleyball.
Right, that's right. Well, and skating, but yeah.
And skating, right, exactly. So, very good. I think we're going to open it up for questions now.
Or comments. Tell us your sports story.
Yeah.
Bonnie, wondering if you can talk about running into a former president of the United States at a GW sports event.
Yeah, everybody loves this story. I'll make it short. You can also see this in my one-woman play next month, which is another National Women's History Museum and GW event. But when I started teaching at GW, 94, winter of 94-95, I went to a double header. There was a practice at that point where you would see the men's game and then a women's game the same day, and you paid $9 and got 2 tickets. So I went to a game and had to go through a metal detector. Why? In our Smith Center, and I was told the president was there, that Bill Clinton had brought Chelsea to a game, and this was very exciting. So first the men played, and the men won. Great. And then the president got up to leave. And I was like, well, okay, what do I do? I'm the women's studies professor. I'd already observed he was pretty accessible. I mean, there's Secret Service, but he was shaking hands. So I pushed my way through, fast everybody said, "Hi, Mr. President. I'm a women's studies professor here at GW, and I'd really like to encourage you to stay and watch the women play. Don't get up and go just because the men have won. The women actually have a better record right now, and they'd really appreciate your support and your demonstration of your commitment to Title IX as Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And it would really mean a lot to your daughter here, and do you think you could watch the game?" And he said, "Well, I'd love to, but I have an appointment at the White House at 2. And I looked at my watch and said, "Well, you can watch the first 20 minutes of the women's game. Go sit down." Yes, I gave a direct order to the President of the United States. He went and sat back down. And I can tell you that he became the first U.S. president to telephone his congratulations to the winning women's team in the NCAA that year. I know I had something to do with that. That was great.
Very good. Well, and do you think, Obama taking his daughters, I mean, they're competing in sports all the time, and he takes them to sporting events and stuff. Do you think that makes a difference?
Absolutely. And it's fathers, too, who have been very active, especially fathers who don't have sons, have been very successful at arguing for Title IX implementation. Because family size is smaller than it used to be. It used to be that fathers usually did have sons. Now, if you only have 1 or 2 kids, you're likely to not have any sons. And if fathers want to play sports with some offspring of theirs, often daughters are all they have. And so then those fathers do teach the daughters to become athletic, and then they're outspoken at the high school level on behalf of Title IX, on behalf of their own kids. Yeah, I know a couple people want to get into the conversation.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Was somebody standing up before?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about, you talked a lot about the changing environment and how there's a lot of, more girls who are familiar with athletics training, et cetera, and yet you also mentioned the statistic of 2% of televised sports programs are for women. And of course, the reason for that is that they don't perceive that that's going to bring in a big audience, and so they're not money makers, basically. So do you see that eventually, just with time, there's going to be a cultural change that will make women's sports profitable? I mean, I know the WNBA, for example, is always struggling, right? And they abolished the women's football league, and because they're not making money. So do you see that changing along with some of these cultural changes that you've described?
I do. It's partly economic, and it's partly who the decision makers are. Most athletic directors are male, most sports editors are male, and so they're seeing what the public wants through their own lens and the lens of their staff, which is usually male. So I know I'm mixing issues about college opportunities for women and media coverage, which are different. But the economic excuse is used on college campuses too. And as educational institutions, it doesn't cut it with Title IX. So when they're not providing opportunities, it's just plain illegal. In terms of media coverage, I do think it will change mostly as we get more women in positions of authority.
Well, and I think I can actually address that
Please.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're one of those women in position of authority.
Yeah, or not. But actually, I mean, because when I worked at the New York Daily News, I did write a column for a year on women's college basketball, which was not widely read, I don't think, but it was, at the time, this was 95 or 96. Boy, I could get any women's coach to talk to me just about, and they were thrilled. And it was, the next year they didn't do it, but they did write a lot more about women's basketball. You and I have talked about this. I think part of the problem, you think you're going to see a difference when you get women's sports editors in there and women's sports writers. And, a lot of the women's sports writers then see the way to move up is to cover men's sports because that's more glamorous. And it's very tough to convince sports editors, to convince people that women deserve, women's basketball, whatever, that if people aren't watching it, are they going to read it, right? Which then it's a catch-22 because maybe, if they read about it, then they're going to broadcast it more or whatever. But I do think, still, while we can say it's not equal, I think we can look at how far it's come and think, boy, we've come a lot further, especially like with, women's college basketball is the biggest one. Women's golf gets so much more coverage than it used to. And I do think that in the newspapers, it's not even close to being equal, but I do think that there is much greater coverage than there was even 10 years ago.
And, beginning in the mid-90s, Connecticut and then Tennessee and then Duke proved you could sell out a stadium for a women's event. And,
well, in women's soccer, and look what that did. And the 1998 World Cup was, an incredible sporting event for women. And you're right, and that you can sell out a stadium. And I think, if we want to look at it again, by looking at coverage, you're almost doing the same thing comparing men's and women's coverage as you are comparing men's and women's competition in sports. And instead of looking at it that way, look at how far we've come. I'm not saying we don't have a long way to go, but we've made amazing strides, and I think as that gets, it's going to just continue to grow.
Yeah, the NBA didn't take off right away either.
Right, exactly. So,
2 points. One, I was there when Title IX passed. I was sitting in the Senate. And have devoted most of my life to making sure it got enforced, and it is still in danger. And what's really interesting, what has changed from 1972 to today is that when it's under attack, it was particularly under attack during the Bush administration, it was not a partisan issue. You could never predict who was going to support it and who wouldn't. It didn't matter if they were Republicans or Democrats. You could count on the fathers of daughters. Yeah. Okay, and that is because women have shown, and that kind of engagement means social change that we never could have predicted. The other thing is that I helped write the legislation to get women in the military academy. And seeing our august group of people here, I just wanted to tell you that I went up to Beast Barracks at West Point, and the 6-foot-tall hurdler that we had appointed, a woman, had already washed out. And it turned out, after we studied it, the prediction for who would succeed, who would start at the point and graduate, and at the Air Force Academy and the other academies, was a woman who could pull herself up on a rope. That was the number one ability, because most women did not have any upper body strength. They did not work out. They didn't have any kind of incentive to do so. And we already knew that they would be smart enough. We had women valedictorians within 5 years. There was never a question they'd be smart enough. But nowadays, they are not just smart enough, they also have upper body strength. So.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you introduce yourself?
My name is Susan Scanlon. I was chair of the National Council of Women's Organizations for 9 years, and I'm on the board of the National Women's History Museum.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, I'm not special or anything, but I just wanted to say thank you. I'm actually new to DC, but I had a question for you ladies. What is the most inspiring event that impacted your life, considering sports? Because I love sports, but what is something that really stuck out that kind of changed maybe the way you thought of things, or it just touched you, something that really helped?
Got one of those.
Oh, Billie Jean King defeating Bobby Riggs, and that was just an astounding experience, and that happened in the same autumn that my 6th grade teacher announced to our class, "I don't believe that girls can do what boys can do, and I'm not going to permit you either." And it was such an obvious falsehood, because I had just proven that a woman could succeed, and she could do it in a very public way. And I think that's a really landmark, extraordinary moment. But I also was very impressed as a young adult by Martina Navratilova and her courage in being one of the first female athletes to come out, even if it meant her immigration status might be compromised. And I saw her play here on campus in a Virginia Slims tour in our Smith Center, and I feel like her name should be raised here too.
Yeah, you're too young to remember Billie Jean King, but it is one of those things like that people remember where they were when that happened, because it wasn't just a tennis match. It was her saying, women can win, women are equal to men. She was clearly making a feminist statement through sports. So since that's what I've been doing my whole life, it so touched me. She was saying what I wanted to say, which is we can do anything. And she did, and then she just made a huge impact on all women through that. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's kind of weird. I'm 57, so I don't have too many of those stories, because I didn't have too many women besides Mom and Billie Jean King and Babe Dedrickson, already mentioned, who I had to read about in a book. So now you have many, many more opportunities to find those stories and be inspired by women.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Thurman Munson was my role model, the catcher for the Yankees, because I was playing softball, and there, where was I going to look? But I was going to look at baseball.
Right, Lou Alcindor was my basketball.
Right, and then it was, but with running, because I was sort of a runner. Joan Benoit, when she won the marathon in the '84 Olympics, and she did that after she had arthroscopic knee surgery just weeks before the Olympics, and how she did, nobody thought she was even going to finish the race, and what she did, and it was really fantastic. So.
Yes, I'm 76, and today's my birthday, and I was, well, thank you, but I have the joy of working with the wonderful women at the Women's History Office, and they said, you look great. And I'm always a little skeptical because I am not short, and I do not have natural curly hair, and I also do not have big boobs. And that tells you that I was raised in the 50s, and that's what women were to be in the 50s. And I'm 76, and I still have that little inkling back in my mind of what I should look like. What pleased me the most in your presentation was how women's bodies through sports were to say, you know, you're strong, you're capable, this is wonderful, doesn't matter what size or you are, you have that so much better a self-image. I have a granddaughter, I'm going on a little too long, who's 14, and her parents say, and she's 5 feet 10, by the way, and her parents say to her, oh, you have such a nice, strong body, you know, you have long legs, that's terrific. My question to you is, I don't see this happening much. You say the improvement in the self-image. What else do you think could be done? I see, when I walk, I see women jogging, yes, but I also see women going off to work in 4-inch heels. Please tell this audience a little bit more that can be done about improving women's self-image.
God, well, the fashion industry has a lot to answer for. Unfortunately, you know, for every positive message about the body, the artificial, you know, images and airbrushed models and fashion magazines, all of this can be explained much better by a viewing of the film Misrepresentation, or a viewing of any of the documentary work done by Jean Kilbourne, who's taken apart how advertising falsifies the female image. I would say that one of the things that's improved somewhat is we have adopted a more diverse image of what a beautiful woman is. We still push women to be beautiful, but now that includes a multiracial image as well as a white one. I think one of the things that has to change is the constant messaging to young women that they need to lose weight. And what I hear from a lot of the terrific student athletes I have is they get a kind of praise from their relatives. It's so wonderful that you won that championship, but don't get arms that are so big you can't wear this little blouse I'm going to mail to you. So a lot of it comes back to being able to succeed as an athlete but still fit into feminine clothing that's designed by non-athletes. I don't know how to resolve that. You have to have enormous confidence to resist the cultural message of a specific body type.
It's called the female apologetic. An athlete will say, yes, I'm strong and brave and successful, and I also have a boyfriend, and I'm going to put on lipstick, to somehow soften that image and apologize for it.
You know, there's a game that I play in. It's the women members of Congress versus the women members of the media who cover Capitol Hill. And it's one game every year. Softball, right, softball. And
awesome.
The media team is average age, I think, 20 years younger than the members of Congress. And last year we raised $125,000, I think, for young women with breast cancer. And over 1,000 people showed up to the game, and it was huge. And seeing these women, the members of Congress, Kirsten Gillibrand's the pitcher, Debbie Wasserman Schultz plays, seeing them play and enjoy playing, and you know that a lot of them didn't have that opportunity when they were younger, right? Their average age is 52. Average age is low 30s, I think, on the media team. But just the fact that they were out there, I think it was so inspiring and so empowering for a lot of people, and that they had the guts to get out there in front of this huge crowd and do that and raise that kind of money for a great cause was really pretty amazing.
Well, there is a correlation between successful women and a history of at least being a tomboy, having some sort of athletic passion in
I think that's when they started it. You're right, it was like Gillibrand and Wasserman Schultz and a couple of others who had played, but then a bunch of others who hadn't. Yeah. And I think when you're asking what can change, I think it's not being afraid. Yeah. It's not being afraid to join that team, to get on that field, to go to the gym, to do, and other people will see you and they, wow, if she's out there, I can do that. can
maybe
get
to
out there.
define
I
beauty
can-
for yourself too.
Yeah.
You know, beauty is courage, or beauty is opportunity, or being strong and fit.
And it's a
rather than
challenge.
their definition of beauty. Absolutely.
Right. Just make it, figure out a challenge for yourself. And think, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Question.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, also for being role models and pioneers and writing about it, making us think about it. It's just been very stimulating discussion. I had a quick comment and then a question. A comment is that I read just the headlines on the New York Times today. Didn't quite get a chance to read the whole article, but it was about women in the extreme sports and the Olympics getting more injured than the men, 16 out of 22. And I was like, oh my gosh, where are they going with that? Are they going to know?
Well, they buried the lead. It was on the jump page somewhere, but yes.
I just think it was interesting just the way it was even covered, you know. So, and then my question was, as the mother of an athletic 15-year-old at home who plays soccer, I would love to hear if you guys have written about the issue that I see as sports becoming such a business that it trickles down so much to the high school, even middle school level, where even though you have Title IX, you don't even have a chance to make to a team many times unless you spend a lot of money on private coaches and leagues and airplane tickets to take your kids. I really think it's a huge access issue, and I would love to hear what you think in terms of how it affects girls.
What a great question, because I think we have avoided the whole issue of social class and income and which schools offer programs and which are slashing recess because they need to bring up their test scores in order to get funding to continue the academic program and so forth. Soccer has often, in this country, been seen as something played by privileged young white women. Elsewhere, it's very different in the rest of the world, but it's become a sport with a positive social address, if you will, because it's located where you have green fields, and those are very hard to come by in the inner city, and that has a huge impact on what's available, what's affordable. There's add insurance costs and stir, and you're absolutely right, because I also see enormous pressure on students who feel compelled to prove their worth by being in an elite traveling team by third grade, or they're informed by their parents if they want a shot at a college scholarship, they had better be that serious and start branding themselves or building a resume at an early age. And this is the interesting flip side to Title IX, which is the quest for daughter's success, which can be translate into access to college. But it also means we're starting to see people looking to recruit that dynamic 15-year-old girl or 14-year-old or 13-year-old. And the pressure and recruitment begin earlier and earlier. And the message to kids who are just sort of figuring out how to put on one shoe is, well, I'm going to be in remedial PE. Everyone else in my school is already on a traveling team, and they don't go to normal PE at all. I don't know what to do about that tracking system in our schools, but I think it's very important to keep addressing the expense of being on any kind of participatory team when we have such a range of incomes and where school districts don't have the same access to facilities in the same city.
One other expense can be to the body itself. It's not good to specialize when you're too young. So in general, playing 3 or 4 sports around the year offers better opportunities to develop a variety of muscles. They want us to
wrap it up
soon.
Yeah. Okay,
Can we do one more question? No.
Okay, well, I wish when they passed Title IX, they had blogs and emails and all that, because when you were at Stanford, I was at Michigan, I entered in 72. And, you know, similar stories, and so much as the Bo Schembechler, the coach, said to us, I played basketball and tennis, the Michigan M will be degraded if women ever get the M.
Yeah,
And I played through, and it wasn't until when I graduated and got my diploma, we fought and all that sort, you know, I mean, plenty of stories, washing our uniforms and where the men played, where the women, and also it was basketball they would talk about, and then there was women's basketball, you know. sorts of things. But even when I graduated, I got my diploma, and then I was told that I could go down to some office, and then I did get my Michigan letter. We were the first year to get it, but it was almost like go in the corner and hide and take your letter. You know? And it's just, you know, one positive is today it's a good table story when you say, oh, I played for Michigan, basketball and tennis, and they're like, whoa, you played Big Ten. I was like, well, it wasn't quite Big Ten. It was buses and, you know, all that. But I want to say that one change that I think is really positive is I was a gifted athlete, and I was a tomboy. I mean, for sure. That's, you know, I had my baseball hat and cut a hole in it for my ponytail, and people thought I was a tomboy and sort of off. I didn't mind, though. I liked being athletic, and the clothes I wore were more athletic clothes, is what I liked. And I do think now I see, I have sons, but I see their friends that are girls that feel comfortable wearing athletic clothes and being athletes, and I see it as just. And that even my sons look up to that, wow, you know, these girls are athletic. And that was so different from my day, your day. So I do really see that as a positive change. And the other you just spoke on, and I'd like to hear more another time, I guess, on leadership, because I do think the team sports and what I got through that did help me tremendously in my career. And lastly, I will say that I think in our First Lady, we have a great example of someone who's athletic and a great role model. So thank you for putting.
I think there's an opportunity to talk more, right?
Reception. We're all going upstairs,
at the reception, right? Because we're getting yelled at.
Well, we're getting invited to go upstairs. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.